All right. Good morning to everyone in our virtual shrine room today. I'm Kathy Wesley, and I want to thank all of the members and friends of the Karma Takes Some Choling Center of Athens, Ohio, for inviting me to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. The topic I was asked to address today is the Four Immeasurables. And when I think about the word immeasurable, I think about limitlessness. And I think that we all of us have a sense in our everyday life that there's more to us than meets the eye, and that there's more to our life than what we see and experience. And so because of this inkling inside of us that there's more to life than what we see and so on, we want to think that there's a spiritual dimension. And there are lots of ways that one can conceive of a spiritual dimension. But I think the Buddhist view, which because of the outfit I do represent, that's a joke, but because of my outlook, the spiritual dimension for a Buddhist might be different than the spiritual outlook for other people. But because the Buddhist outlook is rooted in what it means to be a human being in this world, because it's rooted in the pragmatic, practical experience of human beings, I think there's going to be some resonance with people who hear these teachings, whether or not they're Buddhist. You don't have to be Buddhist to connect to the teachings that the Buddha Shakyamuni gave about happiness and its causes and suffering and its causes. So in a way, I remember my teacher, Kimball Rinpoche, saying at the very beginning of his time teaching us, because people would often ask him, well, Buddhism is 2,500 years old. What does it have to offer us? We live in modern times. And he said, water is refreshing, and it's necessary for human life. So just as water was refreshing for people in ancient times, water is still refreshing for us today. And of course, the analogy is that just like water refreshes across time and space and ages, so too does the truth about human life resonate. And so that's the point of view I'm going to be bringing today, is this sort of, hopefully it will resonate, this human existence and what it is like to be a human being, and to be a human being and to have that inkling that there's more to us than meets the eye. So I'm going to start with a short prayer. And this prayer is a prayer of taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. I'll recite it once in the Tibetan language and once in the English language, and then we'll begin. And while I'm chanting, if it's something, I have muted everyone, so you can chant at home. And if it's a prayer you're familiar with, you can chant at home. And if it's a prayer with which you're unfamiliar, you can join in your heart and in your mind, thinking that you dedicate this session to the freedom from suffering of yourself and all beings. Ho sanje chudan soji chonamla jang chu pardu dani kyapsu che daji jin soji pe sunam ki drola penshi sanje drupasho. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all that lives. And now I'm going to recite one more prayer, asking the masters of the tradition to be present with us. O Palin Sawe Lama Rinpoche Tagi Chiwar Pede Den Shula Kadrin Jembo Gone Je Sunte Kusun Tugging a Drup Sal Du So. Okay, thanks again. As I mentioned, the topic I was requested to speak about today is the Four Immeasurables. And I think that there's several ways to approach this. I'm going to try and get a copy of the Four Immeasurables on the screen so you can see it. Here we go. All right. I don't have my pretty one with the Tibetan on it, but let's see here. Yeah, okay, very good. Let me see what this one is. I have two, and I'll see which one I like. Okay, very good. Yeah, this is probably going to be the one I use. This is, I'll give you this one. It's an English language. I'm going to put this on the screen. And that's going to be our topic. There we go. I hope it's big enough. I don't know. It might not be big enough, but let's give it a try. All right, there we go. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings have that great happiness which is freedom from suffering. May all dwell in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. So, being human is not easy. And there are so many ups and downs in our everyday life. Some day we get everything we want. Some days we get everything we want. Some days we get everything we don't want, and so on. And as a result, our life feels like it's out of control. And it's definitely out of our control. And this feeling is not a good feeling. And so often we try to gain control of our lives by gaining control of our surroundings. We adjust the temperature, we adjust the light, we adjust our comfort level, we adjust what we eat, we adjust our friends, and so on. We make all these kinds of external adjustments, thinking that that is the cause of our happiness, having sort of a perfect external environment. But there's a basic flaw in this approach. And that basic flaw is that nothing lasts forever. And this was a basic teaching of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni. He said that all things are actually continuously changing. And because everything, our body, our surroundings, all the people in our world, they are constantly changing also. And so because we are changing and the environment is changing all the time, the conditions outside of us are also going to be changing all the time. And so what this means is that we're attempting to control an outer world that resists our control and continues to do whatever it will do, making us feel unsafe, unsettled, insecure. And when we feel unsafe, unsettled, and insecure, sometimes we act out against ourselves or act out against others, thinking that that is the way to solve our feeling of not being in control. So for us as human beings, life can be very difficult, up and down, and then we don't feel like we're in control. So the Buddha decided for himself, after he achieved his spiritual realization, he saw clearly the causes of happiness. He saw clearly the causes of suffering. And he was able to articulate to his followers what the causes of suffering were and what the causes of happiness were. And then by applying the methods that he taught them, they were able themselves to transcend or go beyond suffering. And so this is, in a way, a short statement of our situation as human beings. We want control so that we can have comfort and security, or at least feelings of comfort and security. But because everything is impermanent and always changing, we can't get that. And because we can't get that, we get frustrated. And because we get frustrated, we act out. And then that brings, of course, more misery. So the Buddha's teaching was different. He said, it is better to recognize that the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering arise inside each individual person. So each of us has a mind. Some people say the mind is here, some people say the mind is here, but each of us has a mind. And that mind experiences the world. We see the world through the lens, if you will. We see the world through our mind because our eyes can't think. The tongue can taste, but it can't think. The nose can smell, but it can't think. The ears can hear, but the ears can't think. And the skin can convey a feeling, but it can't think. And so in this way, the five senses have to be processed. The five sense experiences come through our mind. And so since the mind then is the seat of this experience, if we want to work with our experience, we should work with our mind. And so this is why the Buddha taught ethics and morality first. He said, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make our world. We create our experience through how we think about things. And he said, if we think and speak and act with an impure mind, suffering follows us. And if we think, speak, and act with a pure mind, happiness follows us. And so, of course, now everyone wants to know what's the demarcation? What's the impure mind and what's the pure mind? We all want to know that. And the answer is very simple. Anything that increases the causes of suffering is the impure mind. And the Buddha said that the impure mind is the mind that is filled with desire and clinging. Some people like the word desire. Some people like the word clinging. I like the word clinging because it sounds willful. It sounds like we're trying to enforce our will on something. So, and what do we cling to? We cling to people, situations, comfort. We cling to all kinds of things, but mostly we cling to our idea of self, me and I. We cling to me and I. And by clinging to me and I, we cause everything to revolve around whether I like it or whether I don't like it. If it's something I like, I want to bring it close to me. If it's something I don't like, I want to get away from it. And everything else, I don't care about. So these three reactions, attachment, aversion, and bewilderment, are what the Buddha called the three mental poisons that keep us revolving in this world that he called samsara. And he called it samsara because the word has the connotation of an ocean. And we've all been to the ocean, and we know when we are looking at it, it's vast and it's wide, and it fills the entire horizon between the sky and the earth. You see nothing but water. It's immense. And so he used this idea of the sea to talk about the immensity of the human experience. And so the human experience, while we are still attached to self, me and I, while we are attached to that, we suffer because we either can't get what we want, or we get what we don't want, or we feel lost and bewildered. And so the practice that the Buddha taught, ethical behavior, not pushing a selfish or a me first agenda, because a lot of our relationships are based on me first, then other people. And so he said, anytime we cling to self and try to enforce a me first agenda, we suffer. We create the situations for suffering. And when we try to be more helpful to other beings, this is I'll call it the others first agenda. If we have a me first agenda, it's always about us and what we can get and what we can get away from. But when it's others first, we then become a servant to others in a positive way, and we can facilitate their happiness in a positive way. And we can also, in doing, facilitate our own happiness, because every human being knows what it feels like to be angry, and to feel how tight your body feels and how painful your body is when you're angry. And we also know how it feels to have just been generous and given something to someone who needed it, and the happiness we feel when we see their relief and satisfaction. It feels really good. And so the Buddha, in his first teachings, said, the causes of happiness and suffering are in our hands. If we pursue a selfish agenda, then we have suffering. If we pursue a selfless agenda, we have happiness. But he went further than just happiness and suffering. He also said that besides ethical behavior and making good, virtuous karma and not making bad, non-virtuous karma, it wasn't just that. He also said that we could, through deep meditation, break through the clinging to self entirely. We could break through it entirely. And by breaking through it entirely, we could ourselves become liberated as he became liberated. The word Buddha means the one who is awake. And what did the Buddha wake up from? He woke up from the sleep of ignorance, of suffering, ignorance of the causes of suffering, ignorance about happiness, ignorance about the causes of happiness. In other words, we as human beings are sort of like children in that we don't know what brings happiness and we don't know what brings suffering. So we just try everything. And so the Buddha was, I guess you could say, trying to be a good parent to us by showing us the effects of positive and negative actions, thoughts, and words. And so that's a little bit of a beginning description of the basis of Buddhist teaching. And this is why the word immeasurable is sort of important here. And I'm going to come back to this every now and then to the theme, which is what does it mean to be limitless? And what does it mean to be immeasurable? It's by the way, they're the same. They have the same meaning. Limitless and immeasurable have the same meaning. But I will use those two words interchangeably today. I'll use them first one, then the other. And so if I use them interchangeably, at least now you know that they have the same meaning without limitation. So I'll get to that in just a minute, but I should probably say one more thing about the Buddha's meditation. The Buddha taught that because happiness and suffering happen in the mind, and because our clinging to self, me and I, are the root cause of all of our suffering, if we somehow can cut our self-clinging, if we can cut that somehow through the practice of deep meditation, we could actually attain a fully selfless state. Right now, we only have, shall we say, a beginner's level of selflessness. We have the beginner's level of selflessness because we know what it feels like to be generous. We know what it feels like to be kind, but we may not yet know the true meaning of true selflessness, which is to go beyond clinging of any kind. And so anyway, I wanted to make sure I said that the Buddha arrived at this place through very deep meditation. Now, will all of us be able to do this deep meditation in our lifetime? Maybe, maybe not. But what we can do is we can begin our path toward that state of Buddhahood. We can begin our path right here in this lifetime. And by practicing the teachings of the Buddha, we can gradually have less suffering and gradually have more happiness, which makes it much easier to meditate. It's hard to meditate if you're doing a lot of bad actions and you have a lot of enemies chasing you, because you know how it is. If you make an enemy, they tend to chase you. And if you make a friend, they tend to stick with you. And so in the meantime, while we're working on learning the techniques of deep meditation, while we're working on that, then we are going to, at the same point, need to practice a little bit. So I'm thanks to the folks who came in during the chat or during the talk. I'm getting ready to ask some questions, and so I'd like to see what questions you have. Because I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are so far. You know, what questions, if any, do you have? I would like to hear them. And I will answer questions for several minutes about these basics, or if you have other things you would like to make sure I talk about today, you can ask about that also. And you can use the little button to unmute yourself and ask questions. Anybody?
Well, I feel a little silly asking these questions, but it's always kind of puzzled me. So in terms of the Four Immeasurables, I always get confused because what we recite does not seem quantifiable, or it's so like what is it? Can you be immeasurable?
Sure.
And may all beings have that great happiness, which is freedom from suffering.
Sure. Yeah, I'm really glad you asked about that, because I get to say, there we go. I accidentally paused the recording, so sorry if you missed what I just said. But this idea of immeasurable, what's immeasurable? What is immeasurable is the mind. For example, you can't put your mind in a box and say, my mind is only this big. Because like looking at that big ocean horizon, like looking at that, then as we look at that ocean, we see that the sky is without limit. We couldn't measure it. And so like that, our mind is like that, without limit. And so but how do we get to the place where we recognize that our mind is like that? And that is arrived at removing the barriers, you know? And so, for example, removing the barriers to experiencing mind's limitlessness. That's what's going on here. And so love is the first thing that can remove the barriers, because when you love someone, automatically there's a connection between them, between you and the other person. Any boundary or wall between you falls apart. The second thing is compassion. And compassion is the second thing that is immeasurable, because again, it breaks down the barriers between people. The next one is joy, because everyone knows that in joy, there's like a boundless feeling. There's a boundless feeling that includes everyone. And then finally, equanimity. Equanimity means that we recognize the equalness and the sameness of all beings. And so if we look at the verses, you can see that the verses actually talk about this. Let's see if I can get them on screen. We might get lucky. And I can do the technical thing twice. Here it is. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. Now, the Buddhist definition of love is wishing for another person to be happy. So that is the first verse is immeasurable love. The second verse, may all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. This is the second thing that is immeasurable, compassion. Because when we are feeling compassion for other people, then we have no barrier between us and them. The third immeasurable thing is, may all beings have that great happiness, which is freedom from suffering. I mean, ultimately, may they have the freedom from suffering that is Buddhahood. And that line is immeasurable joy. And then finally, may all beings dwell in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. That is immeasurable equanimity. So I don't know, how does that help? Does that help, Sally? Oh, hun, I'm sorry, you're muted, dear.
Yes, I've heard those words connected to those phrases, and I'm grateful that you explained it.
I'm really happy that you asked, because you are right. The words love, the word compassion, the word joy and equanimity. Joy and equanimity appear sort of, but not really, you know, and so they don't really appear explicitly in the verse. And a part of it, that's really good, because you gave me the chance to talk about the Buddhist definition of love, which is wanting for someone to be happy, and the Buddhist definition of compassion, which is wanting people to be free from suffering. So I appreciate you asking. There's a couple of questions in chat. Let's see, let me do those. When we see terrible events or experience a terrible loss, how do we then turn our mind from suffering? Okay, yeah, I think this has a couple of parts. And I'm going to base my my answer on the answer that has been given to this by Kimball Rinpoche. as well as the answer given by Trungpa Rinpoche. Those two wonderful masters. Trungpa Rinpoche is still with us. Kimball Rinpoche passed away, but I think it really, their method is pragmatic. So the first thing to do when you begin to feel suffering is I'm going to type this into chat. Be aware of your feeling. Become aware of the feeling. And I mean, by this, I mean, we have to take one step back from the story of our suffering and look at the suffering as though we were looking at it from the outside. Because one of the ways that our suffering continues is because we don't reflect, we don't think about or reflect on our own suffering. We immediately plug our feeling into a story. We create a story. And the story is, my life is wonderful because this thing happened to me. Or my life is terrible because this thing happened to me. And when we think that things are happening to us, we don't have a good view. It's a self-centered view when we're in the middle of it. And so Trungpa Rinpoche said, basically, we have to be aware of what we are feeling. It's good if you can identify, like, I'm feeling bad or I'm feeling good. And so then he said, after you become aware of what you are feeling, recognize that it is a feeling, and you can work with it. Now you might say, how do I know that it is a feeling and you can work with it? Well, because when you take one step away, when you step outside the story for just a moment, it becomes an object that you're looking at. And you might say, how do I know I can work with my feeling? And this is because when we learn the basics of Buddhist meditation, let's pretend that we have learned breath awareness meditation. So we have learned breath awareness meditation. We meditate quietly, thinking and being with our breath, being present with our breath as it comes in, being present with our breath as it goes out, and so on. But what happens is we only get a short period where we're really able to be with the breath. We get a short period of attention, and then that's followed by wandering, another period of wandering. Maybe we wander into the future and think about tomorrow, or maybe we wander into the past and think about what's past, or maybe we think about the moment. But whether we're wandering into the future, the past, or the moment, we're wandering from the breath awareness. And so we notice that we have wandered. We even label it thinking, and then we let go of it, and then bring the attention back to the breath for a fresh start of our meditation. And so that is how you notice that you're having a feeling. Sometimes you'll notice that you're having a feeling because your body gets tight, or it gets warm, or it gets cold. And this feeling triggers a reaction in your body. And this is what will help you know that something is not right. And so then you identify the feeling. And then once you've identified the feeling, you realize that that there's actually something you can do with it, because after all, on your meditation seat, you are able to let go of those thoughts. So you can do it now. You can do that now. Maybe the thought is very powerful thought of sadness or fear, but if it depends on how strong your feeling is, what kind of practice will work best on it, what type of technique will work best on it. Sometimes the easiest and best technique is to recognize that that feeling and indulging that feeling is not helpful. And by the way, I'm going to be muting microphones just so sounds from your house don't make it into the Zoom room. So we recognize that indulging the feeling of sadness or fear is not helpful. And so then we take immediate action. That immediate action could be that we purposefully change what we're thinking. You do it on the meditation seat all the time. You drop that thought and you go back to the technique of watching the breath. Now, this may not be possible, but you can try. What some people do is they practice prayer when they start having strong feelings and emotions. They start to pray. My teacher told me whenever I had a strong emotion that I should think that the Buddha is present right there in front of me and that I should pray to the Buddha. He said, when you have a strong emotion that you can't control, think of the Buddha and pray to the Buddha. And this will actually put your mind in a different location. It will actually move your mind off of dead center. So that's that would be the most accessible practice to do, would be to do prayer or mantra or take a walk. You can take a walk. You can drink a cup of tea. Why do you think in all those movies when people are upset, they say, "Can I give you tea?" Now that, you can have your tea. So that's one way. And then the second technique is the technique of thinking about others and thinking, I'm feeling negative, and if I indulge this feeling, it's not going to help. So why don't I start thinking about others and praying for myself and others to be free of this negative emotion? And there are lots of formulas available for this, such as the formula that's in the book, The Great Path of Awakening. Because there's a slogan that's called the 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seeds of virtue. That's the name of the slogan. And what that means is that sometimes we feel bad and have aversion. Sometimes we feel good and have attachment, and sometimes we're indifferent. And usually these 3 things make our suffering worse. But what if we took those 3 feelings and instead said, may I and all beings be free of this? Then that's another, excuse me, that's another good way of working with an emotion that arises suddenly. And the third way is to breathe and just be quiet for a moment and look with your mind's eye, turn your attention to the thought itself. And sometimes when you turn your attention to the thought all by itself, it will disappear like your breath fog on a mirror. When you do that, it clouds for just a moment. The mirror clouds and then instantly disappears when it hits the air. And so that is the most difficult and challenging of the 3 techniques. So it's easier to start with the first technique and try to work with the immediate situation. And then second, if that doesn't work, you can try the others. But usually that first one will be very helpful. So I hope that was helpful. Was that helpful? Okay, very good. All right. Let's see, we have time for a couple more, and I think there's a couple more farther back up in chat. Is bewilderment, the question is bewilderment and I don't care the same? I would say that yes, because all three of the words used to describe this, which is ignorance, bewilderment. I've even heard the English word, stupidity, and indifference. I've heard them all. Apathy. I love words. So I think what it is that this in between, you're not disliking something, but you're also not liking something. You're just sort of indifferent to it. You don't care. And so this itself can lead to not knowing what to do. So hopefully that will help. Are there any other questions? Oh, someone has asked, how is happiness different from joy? If we look at the Four Immeasurables, the line that says, may they have that great happiness, which is freedom from suffering. And so in a way, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Happiness in this prayer is knowing what positive action is and doing positive action. That's what happiness is, knowing what positive action is and doing it. Joy comes from the freedom that we get from Buddhahood. We get, when we understand all the causes of suffering, and we understand all of the causes of happiness, and we gain control over our own suffering and our own happiness, and we see through, as the Buddha cut through all ego fixation, all fixation on self, when we are able to let go of that, that is the definition here of joy. There are other definitions for joy, but here it's the freedom, the joy that is freedom from the wheel of samsara. Okay, let's see. I think that's all the questions that were in chat. Does anybody else have? Yeah, Barbara. Yeah. You can, you'll need to unmute, just so you know.
Okay. Going back to when you said removing the barriers to experience the limitless mind. And the first thing you mentioned was to love someone, and then compassion, joy, and equanimity. Okay. When you attach love to someone, you know, when you connect that to some person, what I know is I don't want that other person to be happy. I don't want that. I want my needs to be met. I want them to make me happy. I mean, that's kind of the reality of conventional love. So I guess my question is, anytime you attach any of these qualities, compassion, joy, equanimity, well, not equanimity, but to another person, it doesn't work out. I mean, it's more problematic. And the other thing that I'm wondering about is, can't you free your mind by, say you're walking along the beach and your mind, you're hearing the surf coming in and out, and you're seeing how the patterns on the sand are, and you know what's laying on the sand. So your mind is sort of cleared then. I mean, you're not focusing on your breath, and same with yoga. When you're doing yoga for your hour, your mind is clear, all is thinking of the yoga movements. So those are two things I'm wondering about. That's pretty close to meditation, isn't it?
Yeah, I do think that both Tai Chi and yoga, they are good for your body, and they keep the mind and the body together. right? And so then the mind is with the body when it is moving, and you're not thinking of other things.
Right.
And so in that way, that can be very much like a meditative practice.
Yeah.
And you have to get the same effect, you have to continuously be with your experience and your movement without without wandering to other stories or ideas. You have to just be with what you're doing, right?
Yep,
So yeah, so now that's one part of your question, but the other part of your question,
Yeah.
I think you've stated it really well. You've actually seen very well the problem of human relationship,
Yeah.
because human relationship has a problem. And the problem is that the people who are in the relationship are not enlightened beings, right? They're not enlightened beings, right? And so because we're not enlightened beings, we have not our relationship is not predicated. It's not based on the happiness of the other person. It's actually kind of our happiness. Kimball Carter Rinpoche said, this is why we need to develop true love and true loving kindness. He said, because otherwise, he said, most of what we call love is actually, he said, like a business deal. You know, it's like a business deal. I do this for you, and then you do this for me, right? And if you don't do this for me anymore, then I'm done. I don't love you anymore. So so this is why the definition of love is wishing for the other person to be happy. You know, genuinely wishing for that person's happiness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah, we say that. Yeah, we do say that, but it doesn't work out that way.
Oh, well, of course. That's because we're not enlightened yet. I think we have to wait, you know. I mean, honestly, you know, I do think that because we're not, I often say it's just terrible not to be an enlightened being. It's just terrible not to be enlightened, because I don't know what people really need. I don't know what people really want. I'm only still always looking out for myself, and it's a problem, you know. And so we're going to have this problem until Buddhahood. But how do we get from here, where we're confused? How do we get from here to Buddhahood? One step, one step, one step, one step. So we get there one step at a time, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? We only make little progress every day, but every time we catch a mental affliction and are able to work with it, then we're getting closer to Buddhahood. Does that make sense? Just each one. So thank you for that. Now, yeah. Now, let's see here. Patricia, yeah, you had a question. Yeah, I'm sorry, you'll have to unmute.
Lama Kathy, my question is, let's see if I can describe it. Okay, so I have been working on, you know, letting my thoughts go, etc. I have been doing daily meditation for 3 years now. And when something happens in and I did the Bodhisattva, I've been reading the Bodhisattva vows and working with that.
Mm-hmm.
Every time something big changes in my environment,
mm-hmm.
My very first thought is almost always how it's going to affect me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And this is because of a lifelong habit that I have, where I'm in the center of my universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm reading Mingar, and he talks about ego is fine. You don't, and so I've been trying to get rid of what I think of as cutting. You call it cutting the cutting. I've been trying to get rid of it, not really to suppress it, but just to acknowledge that, wow, I'm thinking immediately about myself when something's happening out there. And so, and then he says, well, ego's fine. There's nothing wrong with ego. you know?
Mhm.
And so I'm confused about that.
Sure.
I'm like, sort of
Oh,
like
sure. Yeah.
trying to do that cut.
Oh, sure, sure, sure. Yeah. And now you did cut out for a moment and I didn't hear who you were referring to.
Minger,
Oh, Miguel Ritchie. Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
it did cut out a little. The sound cut out for me for a second.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think we have to differentiate between ego and ego fixation.
Okay.
There is a difference.
Mhm.
Self or ego is what we create when we experience our body, speech, and mind. We experience ourselves. We experience our body. We experience our speech. We experience our mind. And when we experience this complex, we think, oh, that's me. So that's ego, right?
Mhm.
Now, the problem is not the ego because the ego is just a concept.
Right.
And
It's
it is not going to hurt anything necessarily all by itself. But because we have so much habit energy from previous lives, so much me, I'm important, that person's not important, me, I'm the best. Or sometimes people practice their ego by saying, I'm the best at being the worst. So whether you have low self-esteem or you have high self-esteem, you still have some kind of self-esteem and it causes you a problem, right?
Mhm.
So it's again, having the ego, you can't get rid of it. I mean, I'm sorry, you just can't get rid of it until the moment of Buddhahood. It is going to be there. So it's better not to worry too much about it, but to be able to laugh at yourself just a little bit, laugh at yourself and like, oh, there I go, thinking I'm the best. Or there I go, thinking I'm the best at being the worst, So it's like, you can just smile a little bit saying, oh, aren't I adorable? Aren't I amazing? Aren't I funny? Because I'm clinging to this self, which doesn't really exist. Because the idea of self is only a concept. And as such, it is moving and always changing. And because the concept of self is always moving and always changing, it really isn't a solid thing. And because the self really isn't a solid thing, that's how we can cut through. But we have to do that properly and in the right time with the master's meditation instruction, right? So the problem is not ego. Everybody has one and will have it till the moment of Buddhahood. So no worries there. But the problem is when we fixate on it and we demand that the ego gets everything it wants and never has anything it doesn't want. So when we make that, did you see the difference?
Mhm.
Okay. Did that answer the question for you?
It sort of does. So, like, being concerned about that when that thought comes up in your head
Mm-hmm.
is just another manifestation of ego. I mean, it's objectifying.
Okay. Yeah.
Sort
Okay. So ego is an identification. Okay.
of.
Of a process. We have a process and we identify it as me. Okay.
Mhm.
Now here's an interesting thing. The Buddha did not believe in a soul. Okay. He didn't say that God made a soul and you have it and now you have to give it back to God. He didn't teach that. He said, actually, our mind is more like a stream and it's always changing. What's that old saying? You can never put your foot in the same river 2 times because it's always changing as it's moving. And so if we look at our self-concept is always changing and moving too. Okay. So, when and the Buddha used the metaphor of water to talk about the mind. The mind has 2 characteristics that we notice. One is that it is empty. There's nothing, it's not a material thing. It's not made of atoms or molecules. It's empty of solidity, you see? But it's not nothing. It's not something, but it's not nothing. And how do we know it's not nothing? Because it knows. We know and experience things. And these two characteristics are called mind's emptiness and luminosity. Now we're going to get deep into it, because you asked, well, what is the ego? It is a misapprehension of the empty, luminous nature of mind. And this, according to Trungpa Rinpoche in his book, Creation and Completion. In this book, Trungpa Rinpoche says that we experience mind's vastness, and it's too much. We experience, the fact that mind is not established as a thing. Sometimes you get that feeling, when you're looking at the sky. Sometimes you get that feeling when you climb the mountain and look at the sky. Sometimes you get that feeling when you look at the ocean. Sometimes, like Thomas Merton, you get it standing on a street corner in Louisville, Kentucky, watching the traffic go by. He had this like unity experience, right? Seeing the nature of all things briefly. So we make a mistake, basically. We mistake the emptiness to be me, a self. And then we mistake luminosity to be a truly existing world of other people and things. And this misapprehension clouds everything until Buddhahood. And we have always had that. And when thoughts arise and when thoughts fall, they are like a wave in the water. The wave comes up, the wave goes back down. When that wave goes up, it might look like a swan, or it might look like a sea monster, but it's never separate from being water. Never, no matter where it is, it's all just water. And this is something that Mingyur Rinpoche talks about a lot, although he uses different words. The thoughts we have, no matter whether they're good thoughts or they're ugly thoughts, they're never separate from being mind. They never separate. They're always just the mind. And that this was the discovery the Buddha made in his deep meditation. But he didn't just intellectually understand it. He understood it in the core of his being and was changed forever by that. And so I still don't think I've answered your question, but did I get closer?
No. Yes. Thank you for the
Okay.
That helps.
Yeah. Okay. There is time for one more, but then we get to take a break, about a maybe 5-minute break. But let's see what other questions you have. What do you have? Is there any more?
Wow, there's 27 of them.
Okay. No. Oh, yes. Anybody have yes. Go ahead. You can, if you have a question, you can unmute.
Mine was, thank you for this presentation. It's wonderful, and the participation. This may be way too simple and it may be way off course, but I try to kind of go for a line to hang on to, or bottom line it. But is it too simple, off course, to say basically in summary what we're talking about is people being responsible for themselves, meaning mental afflictions, actions, feelings, etc. I mean, can it be boiled down to that, or is that way too simple?
I think that there's levels of understanding it, and that's one of the ways to understand it. Because when we look at the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, when we look at the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma with the three specific styles of presentation that scholars have identified as being the Buddha's presentation, this responsibility for yourself is the very first turning of the wheel of Dharma. That's what he did on the first turning of the wheel, saying that we are in many ways ultimately responsible for how we experience things and how we think about things, and that we can actually change how we experience things, and we can change how we think about things. We can actually change that. And so that's the first turning. the second turning of the wheel, and that also in the first turning, he taught we like to call it the selflessness of self, which sounds a little bit, sounds like too many words, which means that the self is just a concept and it doesn't have a reality, that we're a stream of being and not a self, right? And so that's the first turning of the wheel. Second turning of the wheel, he said, not only is the self concept unestablished, it's not solid. The external world of others, not established either. I mean, now, because we're scientific people, we know that this pad of paper, although it looks really solid and you wouldn't want to hit your hand against it too hard, it's actually maybe 90% empty space, from science, right? Physics. So the Buddha was basically saying that external things don't exist the way we think they do. They exist, but not the way we think they do. And that all things are empty of limitation. I mean, empty of, they didn't create themselves, in other words. This piece of cardboard did not create itself, and so on. It doesn't exist of itself and by itself. And that's the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. And he also taught love and compassion and bodhicitta during the second turning of the wheel as a way of getting through all of this. And then finally, in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, he talked about something called Buddha nature, that things are not just empty, that they are imbued with a basic awakened nature. People have a basic awakened nature. Things are basically emptiness and luminosity together. And so all phenomena is actually beyond expression. So that was the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. Some people call it the teaching on sacred outlook, and so on. So I hope that helped a little bit there, Judy.
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent.
Yeah, we have to take responsibility for ourselves always, and recognize that whenever we think it's about somebody else, it's usually about us, and about how we're dealing with something. Now, I'm sorry, I waited maybe 10 minutes too long to give you your break. Because I teach in 2-hour sessions, the sessions are 2 hours, I like to give everybody 5 minutes just to get up, move around, do some things, and then you can come back and it will be 5 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording and turn off my screen. Okay, thanks very much. We're back from the break. And appreciate everybody, your patience with the process. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is when we talk about the Four Immeasurables, the usual order, as we saw in the prayer, is love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. That's the usual order that the Four Immeasurables are taught in. And when Kimball Karthar Rinpoche, I'm going to be basing my presentation on Kimball Karthar Rinpoche's teaching he gave a teaching for us in Columbus at the Columbus Karma Tiksum Choling Center in 1988. I know that's like a long time ago. It's like before some people were born, right? It's a long time ago. And here's this amazing man. He was Kimball Karthar Rinpoche. He was born in Tibet in 1924, which was the year my mother was born. And for some of you, it might be your parents or grandparents. And during the time that the world was going through World War II, he was on his 3-year meditation retreat. And then when he graduated, he began to teach. He also went to monastic college and got his degree in Buddhist philosophy and logic. And then after that, when 1959 happened and the uprising was put down violently, he had to leave the country and went to India. And after going to India, he taught in a number of monasteries and nunneries until he was sent to the United States in 1976. by His Holiness Karmapa. Well, he was sent in 76, but he didn't get there until 77. But then maybe 10 years after he started teaching, he had already established the Columbus, Ohio Dharma Center in Columbus, Ohio in 1977. And he would come there every year to give a teaching. And then his visits became a little bit less frequent, and then eventually he stopped traveling to teach. But when he was teaching, he was such a brilliant mind and had such a brilliant way of expressing himself, even though he did not speak English and needed a translator. He really understood what it was like to be a human being. And to me, that was the core of all of his teachings, was this capacity to know what it's like to be human and what it's like to have flaws and what it's like to try to work on your flaws and to live in a very flawed and difficult world. And he understood, I think he understood our anxiety and the things that made us fearful, and also the things that made us feel hopeful. And so it was that when he taught about the Four Immeasurables, he didn't go in the order that we thought he would go in. We thought it would be in the order of the prayer: love first, compassion next, joy next, and equanimity last. But he actually took equanimity and made it first. And he said, the reason, I don't know why he chose to do it that way, but I have a theory. And my theory is that he did this because if we understand equanimity, this will help us to experience love. And it will also help us to experience compassion for other people. And I think that this is the remedy we need right now, because I think everyone knows how painful it has been the last year to be in danger from the pandemic and to not be able to connect with human beings the way we want to connect, to be fearful of the disease, to be fearful of something happening to us or our families. And this fear has caused a lot of people to act out toward one another in anger. And we've seen so much tragedy because of people hating each other and people hurting each other and killing each other. And this has been going on forever. But now with technology, we can become aware of the harm that is being done everywhere in the world. And sometimes it's a little bit too much for us it's a little too much for us to take. So at this moment in time, I think we're suffering from a lot of old grievances that are still fresh, if you know what I mean. You know, we're think about how many meditators you know. Not very many, right? You don't know very many meditators. The majority of people that all of us know are not meditators. So they don't see things the same way we see them. And they think this world is real, and that they think that everything they can get their hands on, whether it's money or power or whatever, that all of that is like critically important, then they must have it. And that because they must have it, they must fight with other people to get it. And I feel so sad because this is such a tragic thing. They don't see that by hurting other people, they hurt themselves, that they turn themselves into something they would rather not become, and that their mothers and grandmothers would be just sorely tormented over. I mean, if a person does bad things, their mother suffers, their grandmother suffers, and so on, because of this terrible thing they've done. And their fathers and brothers and sisters all suffer. But I think about the situation we're in now, so many people feeling so grieve, toward each other, so much of a grudge against each other. You have this, you have that, I want this, I want that. And with all of this anger, it's really hard. It's really hard to think about equanimity, but we have to try. And so that's why I'm really glad to be sharing this with you today, because this is how Rinpoche started the talk. He said, all beings want the same thing. And the basis of all equanimity is recognizing that we all want happiness. Trungpa Rinpoche, when he was teaching about this, he said, it's not like 80% of people want happiness and 20% don't care. Everybody, 100% of everyone wants to be happy. But because they don't understand that basic teaching of the Buddha about what causes suffering and what causes happiness, since they don't understand the causes of suffering and they don't understand the causes of happiness, they don't understand that self-fixation is the cause of all of this. Because they don't know, they continuously, it's almost like they beat themselves over the head, not recognizing what they're doing by grasping and hurting others. So our work as Buddhists is to come to an understanding that everyone is suffering. Everyone is suffering. Even people who act badly are suffering. I just came upon today, when I was looking for something else, I found my favorite bumper sticker, and I may not be able to find it, and it may not show to you the way I meant for it to, but if people put things on their cars, right? And their message to the world is on their car. And this is my, here we go. This is my favorite bumper sticker. Mean people are suffering. Mean people are suffering. We all know that there was another bumper sticker about mean people, but we're not going to talk about that one. But everybody who is acting badly is suffering. And as a result, if we can recognize this, we will be less likely to be angry in return. And so if we recognize the sameness of all people, that they all want happiness, but they all keep doing the totally wrong things to try to get happiness, by hurting others, they try to hurt others to get happiness, and they're doing all of this bad karma, right? And then they're reaping the results of all this bad karma. And so Rinpoche said, if you recognize that everyone is just like you, that this will help. And so this to me I understand why this is the basis for his explanation of the Four Immeasurables. Because how can we get to immeasurable love? How can we get to immeasurable compassion or joy if we don't understand the sameness of all beings? And we tend to, as human beings, we tend to have a ranking system. We think some people are better. We think some people are worse. And we think that we're maybe better or we're maybe worse. Sometimes we think secretly, we think that we are superior to other people. Shh, don't tell. I had a person write me a letter once, and they said, Dear Lama Kathy, thank you for visiting me in prison. I did. And this person said, I have now come to understand that my drug addiction is why I went to prison. But the other thing that made me break the law was because I secretly thought, I held in my heart the secret thought that I was superior to other people. I was superior to other people, that I could get away with anything, and that what I wanted was most important. And I wrote back to them and I said, oh, yes, Thank you for writing. And we are all like that. You are not alone. We all secretly feel like what we want is the most important thing. And we don't tell people with our mouth, but we tell people with our actions that we are, we feel that we deserve something and that they need to provide it and so on. Because I think that's true. I think that there are moments in all of our life, whether we feel that we're the best or that we're the best at being the worst, those two extremes. I think that we all have those moments where we feel superior. And what we have to do is we have to recognize that this is a dangerous state of mind and that we need to take action to adjust our attitude. As you know from doing the practice of meditation, adjusting one's attitude in the moment is not easy. But you can slowly take small steps, baby steps, small steps toward doing it by trying to get hold of yourself in moments where you're feeling this and having a conversation with it. Hi, you, self-fixation, you have never helped me before. You have only ever been my enemy. So now, goodbye. And just you do your best to turn away from ego fixation. It's not easy, and it doesn't always work, because our habits are very old. But if we could spend a little bit of time every day thinking about other people and wishing them happiness, this is a good start. We can't completely overturn our self-fixation in one day or in 1 hour. But what we can do is gradually weaken self-fixation by doing the opposite, which is cherishing others. Now, the Dalai Lama gave an exercise, and I will send a copy of that to you. But he said you sit in your meditation seat, and you can close your eyes so you can use your imagination. And then you imagine that you send love to everyone you know. And you can imagine that they're right there in front of you. You can imagine sending them love and cherishing them. And then you can imagine all the people who are sort of middle distance from you, people who are neighbors or people you don't even know who you pass on the street. You can imagine sending them love. And then you can imagine all the people who live in your region, sending them love. All the people who live in the world, imagine sending them love. And then imagine all of the beings that fill space, that little insects and the birds and all of that. Just imagine that you send and extend love to all of them. And you do this for just a short period of time. And he said, just do it for a few minutes every day, just this cherishing of other people. And then he said, you can begin to do little things in your everyday life, like practice cherishing the people who are standing in line in front of you. Just imagine, nobody's going to know what you're doing. They're just going to think you're like looking at your phone or something, and you're busy cherishing the person in front of you in line, or maybe it's the person who is serving all of the people in line, who maybe you think is serving too slowly, but you sit there and you say, okay, I cherish you, person who is going too slowly, And I mean, I know it's kind of funny, right? At first, it's a little bit funny, but nobody will know what you are doing. But what's happening in that moment when you even use your imagination to cherish someone, just use your imagination, which I know With some people, you must use your imagination because they're not nice people, right? So it's hard to cherish them, right? But that's why imagination is so useful. See, now all of that imaginary play we did as children, very helpful now. Very helpful now, because now we know how to cherish even people we don't like, right? So, but the Dalai Lama said, if you just spend 5 minutes every day practicing cherishing of others, you can have a list, or you can just use your imagination while you're sitting and meditating, that 5 minutes or even less of cherishing others. But then he said, rehearse cherishing other people when you are walking in your everyday life. Cherish the little children you see running in the street. Oh my gosh. Or, cherish their parents who are like yanking them out of the street and, and yelling at them, don't play in the street. And all of that, you can cherish all of these people, and recognize that they are like you and that they want to be happy. And you wish them this happiness. And this is where equanimity turns toward love. In that moment, you recognize that you are the same as somebody else. That equanimity turns toward love because you begin to feel what it must be like to be them. You begin to feel how it is to be like them and to suffer the things they suffer. And I know a lot of people say, oh, that's such a depressing thought. Such a depressing thought. You Buddhists, all you do is think depressing thoughts all day. But I think it isn't depressing. The whole idea of equanimity, I don't think it's depressing. I think that it's something we need to do. And I'm going to go a little sideways here and just make a statement also. I think we need to recognize the harm that has been done to people everywhere in the world because of discrimination. I just have to say that. There is so much discrimination that happens in the world every single day. People discriminate against other people because of the way they look, or how they speak, or how they act, or where they were born, or whatever. And I think that human beings, for survival, had to learn the difference between things. They had to learn to survive in the wild. They had to learn how to see and not eat poison and to eat things that were good and didn't kill them. So they learned to discriminate. They learned to tell the difference between things that were good and not good. But the problem was they actually then formed ideas, and they didn't stop with food, and they didn't stop with basic safety. They began to discriminate just because they could. They began to discriminate just because they could perceive the difference between two things. They made the assumption that some things were good and some things were bad. And this assumption is poisonous to human beings, but they don't know it. They don't know it. We all have secret prejudice. Everybody does. Everybody is a little bit prejudiced, everybody, because of how we were raised, what our parents taught us, all of that. But that doesn't mean that we cannot try to change our situation in the moment. There is systemic discrimination. It's all through the system of humanity. Every country of the world has it. Every person in the world has it. But if we recognize and can begin to work with it and to counteract it, act against it, then that's important for us. So anyhow, sorry, I want to go off on that little tangent, but I do think it's important because part of equanimity is understanding that people are different from us and their differences are not necessarily bad. Now we all understand, okay, everybody is these days, everybody's very political. Everybody wants to talk about politics and all of this. And so there are some people who hate each other because of politics and all of this. We understand all of that, but we have to try to cherish even the ones we don't agree with. And we have to try to cherish even the ones we don't like particularly, because if there is any person who we think of as being bad and we don't also try to cherish, we don't try, then that's a person we could eventually harm. And that person could be us, so we have to be careful and to do our best to at least mentally cherish others. And so the Buddhist definition of love is that we wish for another person to be happy. And when we think that that is when we think that that is that other people are like us, we begin to form a bond. We begin to form a connection with that person, and then we will be less likely to harm them. So equanimity is important. Everybody wants the same thing, but we all act badly while we try to get happiness. We all want happiness, but sometimes we act badly trying to get it. We have to understand we're all the same, and to slowly cherish both ourselves and others. So that's a little bit about equanimity, and a little bit of the introduction to love, because love really then is born from what I like to use the English word empathy, where you feel what somebody else feels. You feel for their suffering. And I think if we have that empathy, that feeling of knowing they are like us, this is really important for wishing for them to be happy and wishing for them to be free of suffering. So I have a little extra time here. So if people have more questions, they can type them in the chat. And if not, I can say a few more things about love before we conclude. Are there any questions you have?
Maybe I can just ask it.
Yes. Yeah.
So in a previous teaching, and it may have been you or somebody else, the Immeasurables make a point of saying happiness and its cause, suffering and its cause. Could you comment on that?
Yes. This is a really important thing because we don't just, because we're Buddhist, right? It's like the Buddhist teaching is inside the prayer, right? Because remember at the very beginning where I was talking about the Buddha's first teaching, where he said, may all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness, and may they have, and I'm sorry, where the Buddha said, we are what we think, all that we are arises with our thoughts, and with our thoughts we make the world. He said, if we think, speak, and act with an impure mind, we have suffering. And if we think, speak, and act with a pure mind, we have happiness. The pure and the impure mind, that line in between them, the selfish mind is the impure mind, and the selfless mind is the pure mind. So we have to be able to recognize what we're thinking, which is why meditation is so helpful, to know what we are thinking, because if we are not meditators, we won't have a moment-to-moment sense of what we're thinking. And we'll be 5 minutes into an angry rant before we realize we're even angry, So we have to become aware. And so knowing what causes suffering and knowing what causes happiness is very important. So we wish for people not just to have happiness and not just to be free from suffering, but we want them to be free from the negative actions that cause suffering. And we want them to pursue the positive actions that bring happiness. And because the Buddha taught suffering and happiness and what causes both, sort of the way a parent would tell a child right from wrong, right? So the Buddha was like our parent telling us what right from wrong was. So yeah, we actually, we don't just want people to be happy, we want them to be on the path. We want them to be on the path toward ultimate happiness. So I don't know if does that get close to addressing your question, or is there a part that I'm missing?
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah, okay. And then we have a question in chat. I'll answer the second question first. I'm going to type in the name of my teacher because they asked. Thank you for asking, Barbara. It's Kimball Carter Rinpoche is the name of my teacher. And the Four Immeasurables actually come from the sutras. And so I don't know. I think all of these teachings ultimately come from the Buddha Shakyamuni. Which of the sutras I can't tell you. That's the, here's something that's interesting to know. This is a piece of trivia, just a piece of random knowledge. The Tibetans were not very, reading was not big in old Tibet. In the old days, nobody could read. And so only the monastics learned how to read. And so they studied all of the sutras, and then they wrote commentaries explaining the scripture. They wrote these commentaries in ordinary language so that ordinary people could understand them. And that's why Tibetan Buddhism, although it is based on the sutras, a lot of the teachings do come from the commentaries of the masters because of how Buddhism was established in Tibet. So that's, you will always have some scholars and you will always have some meditators. Some people who don't study a lot of the scripture, but they do a lot of meditation. And then we'll have other people who mostly study the scriptures, but don't do a lot of meditation. So you'll have this kind of duality in most Buddhist communities. But anyhow, I just wanted to bring up that piece of random knowledge. So so I can't tell you the author of the Four Immeasurables. I'm certain it was the Buddha, but Kempo did write many good books, though. Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the books that I think where he talks about this, he wrote this book. Excellent at the beginning. I don't believe that's available for free online. I don't think, because that one was published by a large company. But some of his other teachings you can get from the Namse Bongso bookstore. I'll spell that. The Namse Bongso bookstore online carries all of his English language material. And then you can find his Chinese language material here at the Ocean of Merit website. So for people who can speak Chinese, that's if you have friends that you want to share his teachings with, that you can share them with that website. Those who speak Spanish can actually go to, this is funny. It was created by a group of nuns. Face Buddha, like Facebook, get it? Face Buddha. And that's the Spanish language place to get teachings. And so I don't have a lot of other options, but those are some things. So if you have friends who are interested in Khenpo Rinpoche and would like to see some of his teaching, you can do that. And then you can also go to KTD, which is www.kagyu.org. KTD Monastery is the monastery in New York, upstate New York, Woodstock, New York, where the concert didn't happen. So there's you can go to that website and see some of his teaching as well. And they also, KTD also has a YouTube page, and they also have a Facebook page, so you can check them out. Let's see, what else? Does cherishing oneself necessarily come before one can cherish others? Don't we have to start with ourselves? I think it's going to be different for different people. I can't say with certainty that a person can only start by cherishing themselves, because I don't think it's possible for some people. We have to recognize that everybody is at a different place in their spiritual development. For some people, they can only cherish others first. and then slowly learn how to cherish themselves. Because if you tell them you must cherish yourself first, then that for them is an insurmountable barrier they can't get over. And so we sometimes have to encourage people to cherish others first, and then gradually see that they cannot be discriminated against in their own compassion. Because some of us discriminate against other people, but some of us discriminate against ourselves. And we try to exclude ourselves from kindness, exclude ourselves from prayer, and so on. So we have to gradually learn not to discriminate against ourselves. And so being able to pray for oneself is a good way to start cherishing yourself, is to be able to pray for myself and all sentient beings, or all sentient beings and myself. Does that help with the question? Yeah. Okay, there's time for one more, if there's one more out there. Looking for hands. I won't be able to see you necessarily, so you might just have to unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay. Well, then what we're going to do then is for the last 5 minutes, we're going to do some meditation. I apologize, I forgot to bring my gong. I don't have easy access to one, so I'm going to, I'll say ding, sorry. Ding. Those of you who are familiar with the practice of meditation know that it's actually very easy to learn. You sit quietly. You can sit on the floor cross-legged, or you can sit in a chair with your feet flat on the floor, whichever way you choose to sit. Try to keep your back straight, which means it actually does have its natural curve, and that you place your hands palm downward on your legs. And that you then are sort of grounding your body. Your chin can be tucked in slightly. Your eyes can either be cast downward toward the floor and allow your gaze to be diffuse. You're not like staring at something, just looking generally. Or if that's too difficult, you can actually lightly close your eyes. You might fall asleep, but that's not the worst thing. So then again, you have your seat, your legs, your back, your shoulders, hands, arms, your chin, and your gaze. And then lastly, you can touch the tip of your tongue to the upper palate behind your front teeth as a way of softening and relaxing the muscles of your face. This last one is optional. If it's difficult, you don't have to do it. You begin meditation by reflecting on the Four Immeasurables. I want to be happy. All beings want to be happy. By my practice of this meditation, may I and all beings gain happiness and come to Buddhahood. And that's the mental preparation. Physical preparation is take one deep breath, breathe out, and then just allow your breath to come and go naturally. You can be aware of the sensation all the way in, all the way out, or you could just be aware of the sensation at the nostrils where it comes and goes. And then when you have thoughts that distract you from your meditation, you can use the technique called touch and go. You touch the thought lightly with your attention. You can label it thinking, let it go, and then return your attention to the breath for a fresh start. So it's like that. So we'll sit for just a few minutes, maybe 3 minutes. That was a very short meditation, but that gives us an idea, a little bit of an idea of what meditation is like. So we'll meditate also this afternoon during the afternoon session, which will go from 1 p.m. Eastern to, I think is it 1 p.m. to 3? Yes, it's 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll meditate a little bit longer then. So sorry for the short one, but I'm happy we were able to do this. We'll conclude this morning's session by making aspiration that through this, the merit of this and the goodness of this, may all the great Buddhist masters have longevity. All of the great masters have longevity and good Dharma activity, and that all of the practitioners of Dharma have long lives and good health and good Dharma activity, and then that all sentient beings are rescued from the ocean of suffering. I'll say a short prayer in English. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm happy to see that we have people joining from everywhere. Hello, everywhere. Thank you for being here today, and we'll see you in a little while. I'll be ending the recording now, and but this will be available later today if you would like to watch it again. So thank you. I'm going to turn off my web stream, but you can use the same Zoom address to join this afternoon. The same one will still work. Thanks, everyone. Om Mani Padme Hung. Okay, bye-bye.